Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'll try that again. I did not have the mic on, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
It made a lot of difference to do it that second time, didn't it? Welcome, everyone, to Nash County. I'd like to call our meeting to order at this time for the Nash County Board of Commissioners. It is a recess meeting, and it is customary for our board to start each of our meetings with an invocation by a commissioner, and then a pledge of allegiance to the flag as well. During the time of the prayer, we invite you to stand and join us in that prayer if you like. We ask you to use this time for your individual prayer, if you so like to do that as well, or you can certainly use it for a moment of silence. And at this time, I'd like to call on Commissioner Lou Richardson for the prayer, and then Commissioner Wayne Outlaw for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Stand, please. Dear God of grace and of mercies, we honor you for our presence here today. We ask for your guidance as we go forward with our projects for today. We ask for your presence with our absent board member today. May all that we need receive grace and protection from you for throughout these times of different ailments that we are having. Bless our bodies and keep our minds safe and stayed on you. For us in your name we pray. Amen.
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 Would you join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do have one commissioner, Commissioner Mary Wells, who is recovering from a recent sickness. She has joined us online today, but that's the reason she's not here. And Commissioner Combs will be here momentarily. He had run over a little bit on his engagement prior to this one, but he has informed the clerk that he will be here, but we chose to go ahead and start. Now on item number 4, which is welcome and introduction. And we also have Andy Hagler, our Economic Development Director, who became ill last night and is not able to be with us this morning. It is not COVID related, I will say that. Every time you hear somebody's ill, that seems to be where our mind goes to automatically, but it was not COVID related. But we have a great substitute in his place, Susan. I understand you're going to do our introduction. Susan Phelps, who also works in our Economic Development Director and actually was our first employee in that department. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us here today. We're here today to hear from Duke Energy and Global Location Strategies on our Highway 97 site. Duke Energy selected 6 properties in North Carolina as part of their 2020 Site Readiness Program. Nash County's Highway 97 industrial site was one of those chosen. Through this program, Duke Energy and Global Location Strategies, a nationally recognized site consulting firm, identified and evaluated the potential of the site in hopes of advancing its marketability to recruit world-class industry to Nash County. Nash County has invested in the 142-acre NC97 site as an ideal place for manufacturing, logistics, and food processing, thanks to its strategically located position on the eastern seaboard and its location on I-95. Our team is excited to look to the future of this site and market it as a premier destination for doing business. Today, you'll hear a presentation from the Duke Energy team and Global Location Strategies on their assessment of the site, and you'll also get some feedback from David with Appian Engineering, which is a local firm that's done some design concepts for us. So I'll turn it over to them for the rest of the presentation.
All right, thank you. I'm not sure what Mr. Lamb said. I think he mentioned the raise he got for the extra duty he has volunteered to do. Good afternoon. Glad to have you back again.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Keith Gabriel, and I run the Duke Energy Site Readiness Program. I want to thank Nash County for their participation in this year's program. Now, I would just like to take a couple minutes to give an overview of this program and explain why you all are here today. Duke Energy Site Readiness Program was designed by Randy Broom back here in 2005 to identify, improve, and increase awareness of industrial sites in the 6 states that Duke Energy serves. So we are here today to help assess the strengths and the weaknesses of the Highway 97 tract and help better understand its potential for industrial development. Duke Energy found some great site selection consultants, such as the former McCallum Sweeney Consulting, who helped us develop the program, and like Global Location Strategies, who are helping us evaluate this site here in Nash County. Through our years partnering with these site consultants, we have discovered a few great unforeseen byproducts during this program. First, since 75% of the site consultants' jobs are to find the right sites for large companies, it is a real plus having them in our communities and visiting the sites that we've studied during this program. The goal is to have them bring back real projects and prospects to the sites that we have studied. Secondly, the final report meeting has become a great forum for local economic developers to bring in their board members, county leaders, and elected officials to learn more from a site consultant who understands the process of winning projects in our communities. Together with these site consultants, we have designed the process that we use to select and evaluate sites today. Counties submit potential sites to Duke Energy's Economic Development Manager, which is Donna Phillips in this area, for possible entry into the program. We are not able to do all of the sites that are submitted each year, so we try to choose the sites with the most potential. Sites must be served by Duke Energy, or Duke has the right to compete for the site. Sites must be 75 acres or more. Sites must be intended for industrial development. Sites can be a single-use or large tract or potential industrial park. Once sites are selected, Duke Energy pays for this assessment, except for a small entry fee by each participating county. Lastly, at the end of this final report meeting, each site is eligible for up to a $10,000 matching grant to help the site become more developed. Now I would like to go over the process that Duke Energy and the site consultant used during this program. Once this site was selected, Global Location Strategies sent out their request for proposal, which required a huge amount of work by the local economic development team to respond to all of the detailed questions, resulting in a thick information package on the site with numerous maps and attachments. Back in June, we came to the community for our initial site visit, which we treated just like a real visit by an industrial prospect. At that meeting, we completed our evaluation of the strengths, weaknesses, suitability, and potential for the site. At this meeting, we usually come back a few weeks later, but during this time, we came back a few months later to deliver our findings in a final report meeting. At this meeting, you will hear from Global Location Strategies. They will give a presentation tailored to the community's economic development needs, discuss current economic development trends, and talk about how communities can win projects. We then present a report of the strengths, weaknesses, recommendations, and potential target industries for the site. I want to take this time to thank Andy, who's not here, and Susan for all of their hard work in responding to Global Location Strategies' vigorous RFP. We always hear that information is a lot of work to concoct, but now that they have that information together and available, so when a real project comes along, they're able to respond much faster and more precisely to that project. In 2006, we added the Buildable Area and Conceptual study to the program. During the first year, we found that counties would submit sites that were 300 acres, but it didn't seem as if we could build on all of this acreage. So we didn't know the full capabilities of the site. We began using some qualified land use planning firms such as Upping Engineers and David Rivar's team to take our site consultant's 10,000-foot study down to the 3,000-foot level to look at the science of the site and determine how many acres are actually contiguous and buildable. This study considers streams, wetlands, topography, soils, easements, really anything that could be an impediment to developing the site. The deliverables will be a set of detailed study drawings, a buildable area plan, a conceptual plan showing possible buildings on the site, and a full written report of the findings. The Duke Energy Site Readiness Program is committed to driving excellence. Through 2020, we have evaluated 300 sites throughout our 6-state footprint. But that is not the important measure. The important measure is that 54 major projects have been won on these sites, resulting in over 12,500 jobs and over $8.8 billion of capital investment. Some examples of the projects won are GT Tire in Chester County, South Carolina, Clearwater Paper, Sheets Distribution Center, Sierra Nevada Brewing, and Chewy Distribution Center in Rowan County, and our most recent win, which is Nestle Purina Pet Care, which is just located in Rockingham County. Again, I want to thank you for your participation in this Duke Energy program, Duke Energy Site Readiness Program. And before I go turn it over to Global Location Strategies, I just want to give a note to Nash County. Back in 2013, we evaluated the Middlesex Industrial Park here. So glad to have you in the program this year and hope we can land the project here. Now I'd like to turn over to Dee Dee Caldwell with GLS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that because I had a coronavirus test yesterday because I'm going on vacation this weekend, and I got my results back, so at least for right now, I'm negative. But I want to stay that way because I leave on Saturday. Thank you very much for having us here. It's a pleasure to work with Duke and to work with Nash County on this really important site readiness project. We've done this for several years with Duke, so we're super excited. It's our first time in Nash County. Very happy to be here. Just a little bit about Global Location Strategies. So we're a full-service site selection and incentive negotiation firm based in Greenville, South Carolina. I've been doing this about 22 years, and I started my career with Floor Daniel, and they've been in the site selection business since the early 1970s. In 2009, we spun out of Floor, but we still have a very strong relationship with them. What that means is that we have a long pedigree and legacy of doing projects, manufacturing almost exclusively, that tend to be more on the capital-intensive side. So we understand how companies that are making large investments, creating a lot of jobs, that have very robust demands for utilities and infrastructure and things like that. So, and we take this business of matching companies and communities very seriously. In fact, it is our mission to do this in a responsible way so that both the company and the community can have long-term mutual success. Since 2010, we've had about $21 billion worth of announced capital projects, and that's resulted in over 9,000 jobs. And that's really been global. We're called Global Location Strategies for a reason. But increasingly, starting in about 2013, I would say, more and more projects are being cited in the U.S. So I joke that I spent the first half of my career moving projects out of the U.S., and I'm spending the second half of my career moving them back in. So that's good news for me personally. I don't have to travel as much, but it's also good for South Carolina, my home state, and North Carolina as well. I thought it might be a good idea to just kind of step back and take a look at some of the investment trends that we're seeing right now, because I think I get this question a lot, like what's going on with capital investment right now, or companies making decisions. And the reality is that, as you can see here, we, other than the big years of, say, 2008, we hit a high point in 2018 for cross-border investment. What I'm talking about here, it doesn't have anything to do with mergers and acquisitions. This investment is focused on capital projects, so it's either greenfield or an expansion where there is capital equipment and job creation happening. So this is not about one company acquiring another. And it tracks, the Financial Times tracks this, and it tracks cross-border investment from one country to another. So say a company that's headquartered in the UK makes an investment in the US, they would track that. But it also, for the US exclusively, it tracks cross-state border investment. So if a Kentucky company invest and make a project in North Carolina, they would track that. But if a North Carolina company that's headquartered here makes an investment, it's not there. So to that extent, it's a little bit of an incomplete record, but it's the best thing we've got, so we're going to go with it. As long as it's consistent, that's fine. So you can see in 2018, we hit a high. 2019, there was a little bit of indecision on the part of companies that was created primarily by the trade and tariff uncertainty. Companies that I work with, they really cannot stand risk. So if they had exposure on the trade side, then a lot of them were just delaying to see what would happen. We had a pretty strong first quarter for investment. You don't see that here because what you see is up until July, the end of July 2020, where we had a really steep drop-off this year, and even if we were to double that, would be well below the 2019 numbers. So that's a bit concerning. That's the global picture. But what I wanted to do was kind of look at what's been happening by country, because what we really care about, is what's happening in our country and our own community. So as you can see here, this goes back to 2008, so it's the same time frame, and those represent different countries. So the blue line up there is the United States, and the squiggly lines down below are, other countries. China is in the orange, so you might want to keep an eye on that, because we hear a lot about how China gets a lot of investment, and they do. But you can see how the total projects per year, the U.S. has pretty much had more projects per year than all the other countries combined. And the important thing is that even though investment projects have dropped off globally, the market share of what the United States has increased dramatically. So I'm trying to see. We have over 30% of the total market share of projects. So what that tells me is that our projects have not declined as steeply as other countries. So the number of projects is interesting, right? But we really want to know is how much money are they investing and how many jobs are they creating? Well, it's a very similar story. So you can see the U.S. far outranks other countries. China there is in second position, but our market share in 2020 has gone up significantly. So again, still following the same kind of trend that the U.S. is stronger relative to the rest of the world. And then we see the same thing in the total jobs. And one of the things I want to draw your attention to is right there in 2009, despite what you hear about China, taking away American jobs, and I'm not saying that they haven't, certainly in certain sectors they have. But what we saw in about 2009 was the U.S. overtook China in terms of job creation from these new investments on an annual basis, and has not looked back since then. And in fact, this year, the market share for the U.S. has also continued that upward trend. So that's encouraging for me and for the communities that I consult with in the United States. So then I wanted to look at, okay, how is North Carolina doing? So this is all of the projects between 2015 and 2020. The three bars represent projects, jobs, and capital investment. As you can see, California, Texas, New York, and Florida, they are number 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the number of projects, but they are also 1, 2, 3, and 4 in terms of population. So you would kind of expect that, right? North Carolina is 9th in population, but they are 5th in projects, 8th in capital investment, and 6th in jobs. And even though those movements, in terms of absolute numbers, ranking, moving up, doesn't seem like a lot, you're beating a lot of states that are much, much bigger than you in terms of those three, just on those three metrics. And we find that to be true pretty much of the Southeast. So South Carolina, I've got up there, they're 23rd in population, but they're 13th in the number of jobs that have been created. So the story from this is that the United States is attractive, the Southeast is attractive, and North Carolina specifically is very attractive to the types of companies that I work with. So that's good. So what's going to happen now? Well, at the end of 2019, we were seeing some dynamics that were globally, that were really impacting when and how and what types of projects were moving forward. If I could pick one of these that was the most important, it would be the shifting landscape, the shifting energy landscape. So about 2007 is when the technologies of hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling kind of changed the world forever, known as fracking. What it did is it made the U.S., which had been energy dependent for decades, became energy independent again. And that had all kinds of ramifications geopolitically, but it also made the United States a much more attractive place for big energy projects. Number one, because the natural gas, which is often a feedstock for some of the plastics projects, went down in price, but also because as we started to transition some of our generation plants from coal to gas, our energy got cheaper. And gas now is at historic lows, and I think it's ticked up a little bit, but if we take the long view, you know, when I was doing site selection around the turn of the century, millennia, whatever, you know, natural gas was trading like $12 or $13 an MCF. Now we sometimes see it below $2 an MCF. So just a huge shift. And but that has not happened in the rest of the world. So in Europe, energy prices have gone up, both because of their generation mix. They're shutting down some of their nuclear facilities. They're shutting down a lot of their coal facilities and going to more renewable, but also because they have implemented a carbon tax on anything that is still made from fossil fuels, and that has pushed their energy prices up. Asia has similar issues with, they just don't have the fossil fuels other than coal that can be generated, can be burned for electricity. So as our electricity got much cheaper, a lot of the projects started moving here that we had previously seen go overseas. So we're talking about the big chemical plants, paper projects, anything that has a metal refining, smelting, any of those things that have a big energy load. And that, we could expect that to continue for a really long time. The other things we were seeing were geopolitical things like rising nationalism. We certainly have that in the US, but we have seen it happen all over the world. I talked a little bit already about the trade and tariff uncertainty, threat of conflict. So, you know, it seems like it was a lifetime ago that it looked like the US and Iran were on the verge of having a conflict with several things being shot out of the air, and it was kind of a little bit of a dicey time. We're not thinking about that so much now, but those pressures are still there, not just with the US, but, you know, we see China and India now having some issues, China and Japan, China and a laundry list of other countries, Saudi Arabia and Iran. So those pressures are still there. It's just we're not concentrating on them so much because of the pandemic. And then the last thing is the demographic pressures. So, you know, it's good to have a nice population pyramid that looks like this. So you have elderly people at the top, then you've got, you know, your middle age, and you've got your consumers and your people that are having babies. You want to have a few more of those, and you want to have the base of the pyramid to be your children. The United States had a big baby boom, so we got a little bit upside down for a while, but now we're pretty much, you know, we're not exactly a pyramid, but we're pretty healthy. Mexico and India, on the other hand, very healthy population pyramid, so they got a lot of consumers, they got a lot of cheap labor, that's why they can supply a lot of the things that we need. The rest of the world, not so much. The rest of the world, and as I was saying earlier, you know, if you reach old age and you're an individual, that's an accomplishment. If you reach old age and you're a society, that's a problem. Japan is very inverted. They don't have very many young people at all. Russia's in demographic collapse. China, because of the one-child policy, is also experiencing demographic collapse. And then, you know, the European nations, I mean, the list goes on, which means that they have to rely on exports, and about the only body that's really buying a whole lot of things right now, because China's economy is going down, is the US. So at the end of the day, what all of this means is that we were starting to see de-globalization around the world. So for the last 70 years, producers have been pursuing the lowest cost of production. And that has had some ramifications politically. We're in a different age now. And so there was this talk, which was at the end of 2019. And then like a bolt out of the blue, you know, we get hit by, you know, the pandemic, which has seemed like, you know, a really bad movie if it weren't so tragic. What that has done is just been a catalyst for all of those other things. We're not thinking about it right now because we're really focused on trying to get a cure and trying to get our economy back going. But a lot of those pressures that were there at the end of 2019 have just been sped up tremendously by the pressures created by the pandemic. And what that means is that for me as a businesswoman, for our political leaders, for communities, sometimes it's just hard to know what the heck do we do? You know, what's next? It's chaotic, it's a little bit scary. You know, it seems like we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And what I'm here to say today is that the best thing for you to do is just keep calm and embrace the chaos. It is a scary time. There is absolutely no doubt about it. But the fundamentals are still what matters. You know, you still need to be committed to economic development. You still need to be committed to being competitive through growing your product, through improving your workforce. All of the things that you have been doing up until now, they all apply at this point. And one of the reasons that I'm confident about that is there's a survey that's been done since the pandemic was before it was a pandemic, back in February, was Thomas for Industry has been surveying North American manufacturers to ask them several questions, but one of them is how likely are they to reshore either production or sourcing of their raw materials. And 54% said they were likely, or somewhere between likely and extremely likely in February. In June, that was up to 69%. So that's a strong majority that are planning to reshore either production or sourcing. So I think that's really strong for the North American manufacturing picture. So in a site selection process, what we do is, you know, a manufacturer will come to us, or, you know, we do a lot of warehouse and distribution as well. They'll come to us and they say, we want to find a new site and we need a community that can support us. So we try to put as many alternatives in the top of the funnel as possible. We cast a really wide net, we gather all this information, and then we start putting it through the funnel. And it's almost like unlike a funnel, it's almost like a sifter. You know, you put everything in, you sift out the things that fall out, then you sift them again, and you get smaller and smaller until you finally come up with the ultimate location that they're going to choose. But what's important to remember is at the beginning, we're looking for any reason to eliminate a location, because we have so many things that we have to evaluate, and we have so many sites that there's so many data points, and there's so many sites that we only have a limited amount of time. So that means that your community has to have a site that's ready to go. They have to have all the documentation to back that up. They have to have information about their workforce. They need to be able to talk about how their costs are structured, what they're willing to do on incentives. All of those things need to be well defined at the beginning, so that just don't give us a reason to eliminate you. Because the further you've survived through that funnel, then the more likely it is that we're willing to work with you on coming up with a solution for anything that might actually be either a risk or a weakness. And when we're going through this, what we're trying to do is triangulate on the location that has the best mix of low cost, high quality, and low risk. So if we can find the place that does all of those three things, which you know how hard that is to do, because if you've ever tried to buy, you know, the best house in the neighborhood with the lowest amount of money, you understand that there's got to be a trade-off many times. But if we can find the one that optimizes on all three of those, then the decision is very clear. But my job is to help them understand the trade-offs. And a lot of times it all boils down to a chart that looks like this. So on the y-axis, you've got cost, and we put them from high to low. On the x-axis, you have a quality score. So how good is your workforce? What's the quality of life there? How easy is it going to be to build on that particular site? So you want a high score, so that means you want to be on the right-hand side of the quadrant. So if you have, and then the size of the bubble is the risk. So you want a small bubble. And when we're talking about risk, we're talking about location-dependent risk that's associated with budget, cost, or their ability to operate now and into the future. So where you want to be is in that upper right-hand quadrant, because that's low cost and high score. So I call that heaven. And then the sites that are high cost and low quality, which is where you do not want to be, that's in the bottom left-hand quadrant, and that I call hell. And then the other two corners are purgatory. So you really want to try to be in that top right-hand quadrant. You can't be all things to all people, so you really need to understand what mix of things puts you there. And if you're in purgatory, you want to try to start thinking about what are some of the things that I can do to lower my cost structure or to improve my quality so that I can migrate up into that upper right-hand quadrant. And your role in the process is really, this is for a specific project, but your role in the process as community leaders is really woven throughout the economic development process. But I put this up here just to emphasize that it's a team sport. So you need state involvement, you need local and regional involvement, you've got to have your utilities involved, your transportation authorities, an engineering partner, your workforce, which includes K-12, higher ed, and technical school, your elected officials. I mean, everybody has to be aligned along the same vision to be successful in economic development. So I'm going to go through what I consider to be the 4 keys to thriving in this new reality. So the first one here is you got to have product. So I'm sure you recognize this scene here from the movie. Does anybody remember the line? Yes, yay. That's exactly right. I'm from Greenville, South Carolina, so I sort of have a soft spot for Shoeless Joe Jackson. But so this is one of my favorite movies. But it is absolutely true that if you build it, they will come. But the inverse is equally true. And that is one thing I can guarantee you. If you do not build it, they definitely will not come. So if you do not have product, if you do not have qualified, characterized sites and buildings that are competitive, you're never going to get a visit from me or my colleagues, because our companies, our clients have to have a place to land that's ready to go. Obviously, you want to have a diversified portfolio. So you don't want to put all of your eggs into one basket. So you want to make sure that you have products, buildings, and sites that can meet different types of needs that are in keeping with the other competitive advantages that you have. But you want to make sure that in the life cycle of site identification, evaluation, and marketing, that as soon as you start marketing a site, you have to understand that you don't know if it's going to take a day, a year, a month, or 10 years to have an announced project on that site. And if you wait until you have an announced project before you start identifying its replacement, you could be out of the game for those types of projects for at least a couple years. So the time to start identifying that product is when you're moving into the marketing phase for that particular site, because time is money and clients just aren't going to wait. The second key is developing your workforce. And really, if you think about this in terms of short, medium, and long term, before COVID, when I would give this speech and I would talk to people about their workforce, I really focused a little bit more on the second and the third, but particularly because unemployment was pretty low at that time, in some places extremely low. And it was harder to retain and retrain the current workforce because people weren't willing to leave their service jobs in particular in order to get a technical degree, because they were making good money. But now there's a lot of those folks that have lost their jobs. So I think there's new opportunity there that communities can take advantage of. The second one is attracting workers from elsewhere, and that's not an easy thing to do, but there's been a real paradigm shift. So I've been doing this for 22 years, and I learned from a guy that was one of the godfathers of the industry, and it used to be absolutely true that the companies would choose the community that they wanted to go to, and the presumption was they needed to have a workforce base, but the workers would move to where the jobs were. That is not necessarily true anymore. Now, I think when we come out of COVID, we're going to see to what extent that has some staying power, but what we're seeing now is the companies move where the talent is. And so communities really need to attract the talent, and the companies will follow. So having a talent attraction strategy is really, really important. And it's not just a website, it's a strategy. The third way is to really invest in K-12 education. I know you all do a good job of that. But I think it's worth saying that, 13 short years, kindergartners are going to be entering the workforce, they're going to be going to college, or they're going to be going to technical school, or some combination thereof. And 13 years goes by like that. That used to seem like an eternity to me now, but I have a 14 and an 18-year-old, and I just can't believe it. So it will definitely happen fast, so you can just go ahead and start thinking that these are our future workers. There are a few places, these are rural locations, so these are not urban locations. There are some urban locations that have some incentive programs as well. But these three in particular are things that are just creative ways that communities are using to attract workforce to their location. Harmony, Minnesota has a $10,000 grant for anyone that builds a house there. The Greenwood Promise is in Greenwood, South Carolina. So if your child starts kindergarten in the Greenwoods County School District and goes kindergarten through 12th grade, they will pay 100% of the tuition and full board and everything to go to the four-year university that they have there. And they're looking at expanding that to any state-supported college. If you go there for less time than that, then it's just prorated. So it's not necessarily something that falls into their lap immediately, but for a lot of parents, that becomes a big issue, is how do I afford college education for my kids? Joplin, Missouri, they don't have a military base in their community, but they have several that are within a day's drive. And so they have started this program called Welcome Home to Joplin, and this is a non-financial incentive. This is just an infrastructure of veterans who are already in Joplin, that they have set up this network where folks that are exiting the military can come to Joplin, and they will help them find housing, they will help them find a job, they will, they have a community that is already there accepting them, they'll get their kids enrolled in school. So it's kind of like just being their wingman. And they've had quite a bit of success with that. So those are just things that you can think about in terms of how do I attract talent to my small location when I'm trying to compete against the Raleighs and the Charlottes and the Chicagos of the world. The next one is really refining your business case and knowing where and how you compete and making sure you focus on that. One of the things that I like to think about is when I encourage economic developers, when they get a request for a proposal, that they may not know who the company is, they may not even know what industry sector it is in, but they're going to have some information. They're going to know what their utility needs are. They might know something about if they need rail, how many trucks a day, how many employees are they going to have, how much are they going to invest, what do their utility uses look like. And you can kind of on the back of the envelope do a little cost analysis just to see what is really driving their decision. And I pretty much draw the line. I use a rule of thumb, $1 million per job created. So what that means is that if a company invests more than $1 million per job, so the example here is $300 million invested for 75 jobs. This might be like a metal refining kind of thing or a specialty chemical. They're typically going to be driven by energy cost. They're going to need big, robust infrastructure because they're capital and energy intensive, and they're probably going to have a fairly long timeline for permitting. So you may have a site that can meet those requirements, but maybe it has to have some extensions, utility extensions, or it needs quite a bit of earthwork. That's okay, because they have a long timeline. Now, there's other things that you want to have buttoned down, like wetlands delineation and ownership and zoning. But some of those infrastructure investments can wait until you actually have a fish on the line. If, however, it's less than $1 million invested per job created, one of the examples I like to give here is that we worked with a Belgian bus manufacturer called Van Hool. They invested $47 million and created 600 jobs in Morristown, Tennessee. They've announced it. They haven't created them yet. So they are driven. Their requirements for utilities not very exotic. They just need a nice flat site. It was a big site. But they're more driven by labor cost, and they need something that's speed to market. So you need to have that site fully characterized, pre-permitted, ready to go. Either of these types just depends on the type of project, whether or not logistics is going to play a big part in the decision. And there's not much you can really control about that except from an infrastructure standpoint. But they all need good workers. They need talented workers that are available, that have the skill sets that they need. So I wanted to throw up this benchmarking example. This was for an automotive supplier that we worked with early this year. This project is on hold. This was just a benchmarking of counties across the Southeast. And I should say that it was based, that the cost was almost exclusively based on labor cost. And the quality was about 60 or 70% labor-driven, about 10% quality of life, and then the rest was based on logistics. And so I will say that your county did not score well in logistics. And I already told you that's not something you can do much about. But I did want to show you how many, this color blue right here is North Carolina, and you can see how many counties in North Carolina were in the top half of the analysis, which meant that they were lower than average cost. Even though these were pretty decent jobs, but they're comparing a specific occupation in one location to that same occupation in another location. And Nash County was cost competitive. You scored slightly lower than the average on the quality score, but that was driven almost exclusively by the logistics piece. Had that been taken out, you would have definitely been up here in the heaven category. So I think that's encouraging. I just wanted to show a real world example of how that actually works. Incentives, important, but should not drive the project. So if you get an RFI from a company and they're wanting to talk about incentives before they've really gotten to know you, the site, the community, that's probably a red flag. We don't start with incentives. We will ask you for some indicative incentives up front just because we want to understand, and sometimes it's really important to know those so that we don't penalize you. But incentives are really just going to make a difference. They're at the very end of the project. They're going to separate the top 2 or 3 locations from one another, and they could actually seal the deal. But they should not, and our projects do not drive the decision. So the last one is upping your digital game. This is a new world that we live in, and I always talk about marketing and telling your story, but you need to tell your story digitally now. The Thomas for Industry, the North American manufacturer, said that it was extremely important to attract new customers to have a digital marketing strategy. And I think that's equally true for economic development because we just can't do business the way that we used to. I haven't been out on site visits at all with clients yet, have I? I don't think so. But that's coming up. There's going to be only so long that we can delay it. We do a lot virtually. And so your community needs to have the tools to be able to communicate what a great place this is digitally. One of the ways to do that is through storyboards with GIS. This is just an example of a regional group down in Savannah where it's a very interactive storyboard kind of thing online. We do virtual site visits, so this is very common now. Instead of a consultant site visit, we've been doing this for several years, but instead of a consultant site visit before the company comes out, we most often do a virtual site visit where we basically go through we do everything that we would do on the ground except for actually get in the car and come here. So it's really good to have your technology lined up, to have the GIS capability, certainly the audio-visual, getting all your partners aligned on how to log in and that sort of thing. This is your first chance to make a really good impression on the client, because when we started doing this, clients were not typically involved as much in the site selection process during what we call phase 3. But the unintended benefit of this is that the client can actually log on to the site visit. They're not going to go and fly on a plane and drive to all these places for 2 weeks, but they will log on, and they'll either be a passive participant, they'll be an active participant and ask questions, or sometimes I've had clients that lead the whole meeting. What that means for you is that you got to be on your game, because a consultant might be a little bit like, well, we can get through this, and if you don't do so well, clients sometimes don't have the patience for that. So really got to be really got to be practiced at this and ready to show them how you can help them. The other thing is staging your sites and buildings. So just like you would stage your home before you sell it, making sure that you are putting as many visuals as possible to communicate to the prospect what their operation could look like on your site. And I would encourage you to have multiple layouts so that they could, because one of them might not fit their needs. But if you have 2 or 3, there might be something in there that they can go, oh, that kind of looks like if you add a few more feet here, change the orientation a little bit, that could work for us. So you don't want to leave it up to their imagination. Not all clients are engineers, and sometimes they need a little help. Even us consultants sometimes need a little help. This is just an example that I really like that is of an urban environment, but you could certainly do this in an industrial park or any type of environment, that it's more of a 3-dimensional view of what's around me, what's the scale, how does it relate to the infrastructure, and you could even superimpose possible buildings into that type of environment so they can see, okay, I've got a 100-foot setback. What does that really look like? What does that mean? So this is really great. And I think one of the things that we're going to see coming out of COVID is a lot of advances in this digital technology to be able to both communicate verbally and visually, but also to be able to communicate the attributes of a site or a community. Last, I'll just wrap up with one of the other things that Thomas for Industry asked the North American manufacturers is how confident they are there will be a recovery. And 91% in the June survey said that they believe that there would be a recovery. So it's very encouraging. But I do believe that as those communities, we've got a lot of communities that are looking down the barrel of significant budget shortfalls, and it's tempting to cut economic development, but it's very short-sighted because economic development and investing in your product and in your workforce is really an investment for the long run. So as a very smart economic developer once said, economic development is a marathon, not a sprint. So don't get frustrated. This is a crazy time. We're all going to come out of it. And, it's really about finishing the race and making sure that, I've done a couple of marathons. I did the first one to prove that I could do it, and the second one to prove that the first one wasn't a fluke. But you will get there. And, it is a major accomplishment to stick in there and, see the wins that will come to your community, and it really is an impact on your community for generations to come. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
While we're waiting on Sarah to come up and do the site-specific discussion about the Highway 97 site, I just wanted to layer on a couple of things that Dee Dee hit on. You remember the funnel, and site selection consultants, if you ever see a presentation from, has a funnel, and so it's all very similar. But she likes to refer to themselves as site selection consultants. I call them site elimination consultants, because really what they're doing is trying to eliminate quickly to get to the bottom, get to the final site. So our job is to stay in that funnel as long as we can, and that increases the odds that we're going to be a finalist and that we're going to get the site consultant here to our community to actually see how good we are. So that this is a good time to be keeping your product improving all the time, getting it better, and increasing your product, getting ready for that so you don't get eliminated. The second thing, she had up my favorite quote, which is the marathon, not a sprint. Perfect example of that is the very first site we did in the site maintenance program in 2005 was a huge site in Chester, South Carolina. Over the years, it finished second on a lot of projects. It was the bridesmaid, never the bride, until finally, 10 years later, it won the GT Tire plant. Huge plant, transformational to that county. So it is something you got to hang in there for and continue to be ready. The owner of that site was the L&C Railroad, and they added to that site every year. They did something to progress that site until it was finally in that upper right-hand quadrant, which Dee Dee calls heaven, and that one on the plan. So anyway, just wanted to kind of highlight a couple of things that Dee Dee had said.
Thank you.
Slides were going there, but, well, I'm excited to be back in Nash County. We were here in June for the site visit, which seems like ages ago. I have no concept of time anymore in COVID era, I know that much. But I'm going to get into a little bit more on the site analysis for the Highway 97 site and talk through a little bit of, I'll provide a report to the economic development team that goes into much more detail, but I'm going to hit on some of the highlights, some of those key strengths, some of those limitations that we see for the site as of now. And really, I say as of now, it's really as of June. There could have been things that have happened since then, but it's really kind of that time stamp of then. Talk a little bit about industries that may be suitable for the site, and then I'm going to turn it over to David to talk through more of the buildability and developability of the site. I think everybody kind of knows where we're at on the site here, familiar. It's on North Carolina Highway 97, close to I-95. We're looking at about 142 acres. I know that there may be other acreage that could be available eventually or has been evaluated in the past, but this was the focus for our analysis for today. So again, I'll let David go on that developability, but pretty easy to see the site. It was cleared there. I think the farmer was out doing some farm work when we were out there, so we're not having to see through the trees on that. Flat topography there, and again, that transportation access is key for this site. Wanted to point out some of these visuals. This program's really focused heavily on the site attributes and some of those technical factors, but these maps show the workforce labor shed at both a 30 and 45-minute drive time. And so you can see some of the stats that kind of fall within that. But when we're evaluating workforce for our projects, we know that workers don't stop at county lines, that they move around. They're not just in a city. So that's what we look at these, and it kind of pulls in ZICTAs, which is the zip code areas, and so we can really customize these search regions around particular properties that we are evaluating. So this shows just the summary slide of the SWOT, so the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that we went through for this property. The report goes into all these details. I am not going to hit on every single one of these today, but just from a quick look, you can even see that there are a lot of greens. That I know this property, I'll get into some of the assets there, but there have been several looks at it in the past for different projects, and a lot of work's already gone into the property. So first I'm going to hit on some of the limitations, and again, I say limitations because it's not something, these aren't deal killers necessarily or anything like that, but looking at the wetlands and stream there on site, you can see there on the visual that it's going to have some impact. I think when we talk about kind of the concept plans of how this site could develop, it could potentially be for multiple users that could maybe fit well around some of those natural features, but you may have to have a stream crossing or something there to access those different areas. So again, wetlands is one of those things that our clients look at more from that risk perspective, because permitting any encroachments or anything that can be timely and costly as well in the process. Also on the utilities, all of the utilities are at the site, which is a great strength of the property there, but I did note that on the water and wastewater, they're kind of capped at around 100,000 gallons per day right now. So not to give away the show, I think for some of the lighter, maybe distribution type of users that would look at this site, that would be suitable. But I think you could get one user in and they take a good bit of that away. So if you do look at maybe multiple users in the site, or it's kind of more for long term, that one person could kind of eat up that capacity. So I think we kind of talked through, there could be some maybe long term or different things that could be evaluated on increasing the capacity for that. But as of today, again, I think that can meet a lot of projects' needs, but maybe just one project, that type thing. So it kind of eats at that capacity. On the electricity there, the Duke team has already taken steps to do planning on extending infrastructure to the site to bring three-phase service to the site. So that's already, having that in the system and taking those steps have already shaved off some of that schedule that would have to occur otherwise. So it's on the right track, it's progressing, it's getting as far as it can before that prospect shows up. But again, just not having that 3-phase there at the site already, I believe it's just single phase, that can be a limitation for some prospects. On the site access there, on the limitations, again, I think I kind of hit this when I talked about the wetlands. So the wetlands are something that you have to avoid somewhat on your building configurations and how you want to have those footprints. But then this is also hitting on kind of that transportation access to get it to the different developable areas within the site. And then I say the kind of threat of the unknown. And actually, this site has a little less unknown compared to others. So there has been some due diligence studies done in the past, and having that work, even if outdated, is very helpful for a prospect to see. So again, we just want to make sure there's not an issue on the site. Now, some of those, again, phase ones, those are only good, I think, really maybe 90 days. So I believe the last one could have been 2010. I'm testing my memory right now. So I would recommend kind of looking at updating that, geotech, and then some of the studies that had been completed recommended maybe a little bit of further work. So I think there was a potential archaeological area. It may be able to be avoided. It may not be an issue, but again, sometimes you have to peel the layers back a little bit more on these engineering studies just to confirm and make sure there's no risk involved there. And then on, again, the workforce, a lot of the workforce stats looked good there. Just noted that there was higher. So those bar charts there at the top are more of the highest level of educational attainment. So that's 30, 45-minute, and then the North Carolina average. And so just on that 30-minute, kind of that closer workforce, you can see the highest level is that high school degree. So that just shows closer, if you're going to need some of those engineering, bachelor's degree, you're going to have to just go to that wider range for some of those. And you see the bars kind of even out a little bit more when you get to the 45-minute. And really, I think there you're able to capitalize on the region and that proximity to Raleigh to really gain some of those awards that you need for certain positions. So really just kind of on those initial conclusions, I mentioned the wetlands and streams impacting both the developability of the site and then the ingress egress of the site. It's really not, it's not covering a ton of the site, but it is just something that has to be worked around. The water and wastewater capacities are limited, and then those electric requirements that have already been planned and are in process on that side of things, but will need to be extended to the site. So looking at the assets there, the site size is large there. There's other land. I know this was focused on this, but I think about if this site, I say park because I'm thinking if there's multiple users there developed, there could be potential to have growth in this area if some of those other things come to fruition. Mentioned the topography, and there was no floodplain on the site too. So again, floodplain, that's another one of those issues that we look at for risk of cost and schedule to mitigate for projects. On the, continuing on the assets there is already zoned general industrial, doesn't have to go through that rezoning change, so that's favorable. You check that box already from the request for information there. The surrounding land use, a lot of that were farmlands. There were a little bit of commercial there north, but again, nothing that looked detrimental. I wouldn't want to have, if we were looking at a distribution and there was a ton of residential right next door, that just would not make sense with trucks and passenger traffic mixing. The other strength, which is huge, is that it's owned by the county. So in the prospect's eyes, that's our least riskiest method of ownership there, because we know that a county, municipality, or an economic development organization, they're typically motivated by jobs and investment, not that private investor or developer that's more driven on that bottom line there. So that's a huge strength for this property. And also the easements, there's not an easement going right through the site. I feel like so many times I'm looking at a site and there's wastewater, or I'll pick on my power people and say there's a transmission line going through. And so really, it's just kind of working around that stream, but there's not really many impediments on the site to develop it. On the utilities there, again, so the upgrades, again, are already in place in that preliminary planning. You're obviously on Duke's radar to be able to get those extensions there in a timely manner. Natural gas is there, the telecommunications, again, I think these are all strengths. Transportation, I think that's going to be huge for this site, is really that proximity to I-95. So That interstate access is so key for many prospects, manufacturing or distribution, but particularly anything with the logistics there. So that highway access. There's the intermodal with the Carolina connector in the region as well. I think that's an asset to also capitalize on because this site is not directly served by rail. You also have proximity to Raleigh for RDU. And then on the potential assets there, I think it would be important to look at a dual ingress egress into the site. So if there's projects that have a lot of trucks and things, having two ways in and out is really key for safety concerns and making sure roads aren't blocked. So I don't know if there's ways to have conversations with adjacent landowners to maybe look at connectivity over further west to Sugar Hill Road or another road there to do that. But I think that potential for a dual ingress egress into the site, especially one that large, could really make the site more competitive. And so looking at those assets, again, the interstate proximity, topography, and then being owned by the county, again, that's a very substantial. I said at another meeting earlier that landowners sometimes can be the fatal flaw in a project. So you can have a perfect site, but if you can't get the landowner and the community and everybody to get on the same page, that project may look elsewhere. So on the recommendations there, I think it's just to continue looking at utility planning, and I think more long-term that, again, you have utilities there in terms of that water and wastewater to serve kind of that initial customer. But I think if you look at if there's going to be multiple tenants out there or, again, that one user, that first user could take a good bit of that 100,000. So really just kind of continuing looking at plans, cost and schedule estimates for improving utilities in the area. On the due diligence, a lot of these studies have been done, but these are those things that you can do to make sure you're checking those boxes, staying in that funnel longer. So some of these are more updates or further analysis on things that have been found previously. I believe on the archaeological, the last report may have been from 2017. So, and there was one spot that may have some implications and trigger some permitting if you're doing wetlands permitting. So again, some of these studies get triggered in different ways in the process there. I think I accidentally hit a slide here, but I think also thinking about that transportation planning long-term. So the access to the site, again, as you can tell, I'm thinking a little bit more distribution for this site because of the lighter utilities and the proximity to the interstate. But again, I think continuing or starting discussions with different landowners to see about a right-of-way or easement over to provide a second access to the site as well. So on target industries, I want to just point out that this is not a detailed target industry study by any means, but for all of the Duke sites this year, GLS, we have graded them kind of against different project profiles. And so the first one is a more generic general manufacturing profile that we have. This one I've obviously stated my bias to warehousing and storage for this. And then I kind of threw in some manufacturing to see. So we looked at different clusters around the area, different regions. So just to kind of get a feel for how it would stack up in these kind of different kind of tranches of projects. I don't expect everybody to be able to read that, but this just kind of shows that general project profile that we would use for general manufacturing. So we look at acreages and utility requirements and logistics. And so we have these developed for numerous different types of projects that we've worked over the years or have other resources to pull together. So on the general manufacturing, it is a little bit more marginal, again, primarily kind of due to some of those capacities and things, but you can see there's some greens. It's not served by rail. Not every general manufacturing project needs rail, so that could be an NA. They are probably as well there, but again, I think getting those upgrades on the electricity and everything could make it better for the manufacturing, but again, it just needs to take a few more legs of work before it gets there. So this is just kind of some more supplemental information on clusters and things that you can see where warehousing and storage shows up across the U.S. And then this one I think is very well suited. Again, lots of greens there. Some of those things that will need to be worked around are kind of those streams. That's why developability. Once that electric's able to get there, that's going to make it more of a strength. So again, I just think it's the long-term planning for if there's more than one of these that comes in the area. Because I think looking back, some of my distribution projects, they could take, 60,000 gallons per day, just one project. And so then you don't have as much left for when the next one wants to come in as well. Specialty chemical, this can include things, so these are broad sectors, but like pharmaceutical and resins and things like that. Obviously, this one's not as well suited. I also thought about putting food in there. I know that you all have a lot of food kind of in the area as well. It sounds like there are some other locations probably within the county that may be more suited for some of these type projects. I say that, I know food has looked at this site in the past as well. So I think with some of those infrastructure upgrades and water and wastewater, those are typically larger users on that. It could open up more windows on some of the different manufacturing uses. So again, just kind of looking at those ideal targets, that logistical driven client, close to that proximity to the interstate. We'll talk about on the concepts too, but even with some wetlands mitigation, that's not always ideal, but you can get some pretty large size projects on there as well in terms of square footage. And then again, less intensive on the utilities would be kind of that more ideal target based on current status of the site. With that, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Thank you.
We took a look at the different layers that the site has to offer, from the environmental, wetlands, riparian buffers, soils. Take a look at the zoning, overlaid that with the topography. We did an analysis on the slopes of the topography, and we compiled that into several different maps, and ultimately ended up with a buildable area map, or how much could the site actually be developed by. And so I'm going to skim through some of these maps fairly quickly here. It just shows this is the aerial map, which you are probably familiar with. There we go. Existing utilities. And all these updated maps have been available to Andy and his team. And as you can see, there's topography there. The site drains internally to the existing swale, the ditch down the middle of the property. There's a pond on site that it drains to, and ultimately goes north into the Tar River on the other side of 97. It's very gently sloping site with less than 2% slopes, which is perfect for development. Don't need a whole lot of cut and fill to make the site work. There on the hydrology map, you can see the wetlands that have been delineated and are being confirmed by the Army Corps of Engineers. There is the riparian buffer for the tar PAM that the state has confirmed that this is the way to go, and that is valid for another 5 years. It's a 5-year renewal period for that. Those are the major hydrologic features that are the constraining factors for development, as we'll see in just a minute. We overlaid that with the soils, good farming soils out there. They're not a high concern about the developability based on the soils. Take a look at the zoning. And then so what we have here is the buildable area. What can this site actually hold? You have 140 acres, 146 acres. Well, 93% of that is developable. That's great. So you have 132 acres you can develop with as a result of taking out the riparian buffers, the wetlands, the soils. So then we worked with Andy to come up with 2 sketches. This first sketch is a real sketch for a real industry, that shows entrance road, access road coming in off of Highway 97 with 3 out parcels. There's a 30-acre out parcel, a 67-acre out parcel, and then the out parcel is 40 acres or so that has frontage along NC 97. The DOT has reviewed this sketch as well as the others and has no comments on it. They say it's workable. The access road could be DOT maintained. At this point, depending upon the development that necessitates this access road, there'll be some turn lanes there on NC 97. Again, those details will need to be worked out depending the specific industry that comes in. The lot 2 in the northeast, the upper right corner,
That is shown as a 65,000 square foot building, a light manufacturing building. It could be larger than that, but that certainly shows that there are different size building footprints that could be developed at this site. So you have a 300,000 square foot building plus another 400,000 square foot expansion. So altogether right here is about 1 million square foot under roof that this site could definitely be serving. I'll scroll down to the next slide, which is, okay, suppose we have a large industry. What's the maximum rooftop that this site could realistically serve? There's a 1 million square foot building on 98 acres, again, separated into 2 out parcels because of the creek. But again, still that just serves over 1.1 million. There's cross docking distribution there with employee parking and truck parking, maneuverability that shows, again, it could be served by an access road. So this site, which has been heavily marketed and discussed in the past, is still a great option with lots of possibilities in the future. And I think at this point, we're going to kick it back to some Q&A about any further discussions about anything we've talked about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Before we get into any questions, I wanted to make a couple of comments. First, thanking Appian Engineers. We have worked with them on many projects in the eastern, many of these studies on the eastern part of North Carolina. And David and his team do a great job, and we're always glad to work with them. And now that he's got this in his system, when you have a client, Susan, that comes in and you happen to know the exact layout of their building or what they need, David can plop that down on one of these conceptuals, and it's a pretty powerful tool to be able to put a client's, potential client's building in front of them, showing how it would look on the site. So anyway, thanks, David, for all your help. Second piece is Keith, in his opening remarks, mentioned a $10,000 matching grant. As you prepare this site or go further with it, with either the due diligence studies that are still needed to be completed or renewed, or any of the things that are improvement, those are things that are eligible for that $10,000 as a matching grant to what you're willing to invest in your site. And it's great that the county owns the site. That makes it even better. And Donna Phillips is your hero. She'll write you that check when the time comes for that. And lastly, I just want to thank Nash County. This is great to have this kind of leadership in a meeting like this. It shows how strong your team is around economic development. And like Dee Dee said, it's definitely a team effort, but this is a great demonstration of that. And site consultants notice that kind of thing too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Also, the group will be around for a few minutes if there are any, informal questions that you want. And, are there any further questions that you want to hit any of the team with right now?
All right, I'll open up to board members, I think. Any question any board member has about the presentation?
Well, I was just wondering how far do they go, Duke Energy go working with you after the site selection has been picked, or is it just the grant process?
This is sort of the end of our site readiness piece, but Donna Phillips will be continuing to be involved with your improvements to the site, particularly the electrical infrastructure part. And in addition to that, Duke Energy has an entire team of business recruitment, industry business recruitment folks that travel all over the United States recruiting industry back to our service territory. And those folks will be aware and have this site in their inventory to be able to present it to prospects and possibly bring you leads. They'll be contacting Susan and Andy for information on the site, and often you will have the opportunity to maybe submit this site through them to some of the prospects that they're talking with across the country. So that's sort of Duke's ongoing involvement in this.
Thank you. Other questions? This may be a little bit too much in detail, but there was one thing said, of Mr. Caldwell that I would like to ask a question on. You mentioned one former industry that you were involved in that looked at Nash County. You saw a lack of logistics. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that? Because that was a little bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I should have been a little more specific. So what we were doing was a non-site specific benchmarking of counties. And it wasn't that you did not have logistics infrastructure or services, but relative to where their suppliers and their customers are already located,
Okay.
you were not ideally located.
I got it now. I understand. For that particular industry.
For that particular project even, so.
Right, okay.
Not something you can change, but
Cool. I got it.
that's why I did score as well.
Yeah, I fully understand the statement now. Any other questions?
Got one.
Sure, Mr. Outlaw.
If you, from what I heard you say, the site is probably best suited for a distribution center, something like that, and allowing for the size of this site, 130-some usable acres, how does this site compare with other sites across the state that you are evaluating? I mean, are we even near in the game to attract a distribution center? Yes.
Or just in general?
Well, I'm saying distribution center specifically.
I think you're probably on track because you've already done a lot of due diligence and you've had a lot of looks at this site already. I know that when we were talking conceptual plans, there were already a lot of plans on the shelf already that we were able to kind of look at and tweak. I think some of those things, taking it further on kind of the planning, I think, David's conceptual, that was a pretty big box that can go on there.
Yeah.
I think you've got to have another ingress egress if you're going to really be attractive for some of those. So that's where I really think kind of talking and seeing where there's some other connectivity, whether it's Sugar Hill or those continuing discussions with DOT as well, just to make sure the access as well. Because I think that's probably, if it's one point in, I think that's where you're going to falter compared to some other locations that
Well,
maybe.
that was exactly my next question. So what would you consider to be the top 3 things that we would need to do, or limitations that we could eliminate to further market this site? Access is one.
Yeah, I think access is one. Probably some of the due diligence, understanding a little bit more on the wetlands, I would say, because that's going to kind of impact exactly where, and that's already going through the Corps, right?
Yes.
So you should have the answer then. So then it's probably getting back what comes from the Corps and kind of doing some planning to kind of understand where's minimal impact if you have to cross that stream to get to that back parcel, or that type of planning that you can do. Trying to think on the third here. I'm trying to think of something. But it's really, I kind of think access and the due diligence studies. There were some other things that the updated phase 1, all of those that again are eligible for this matching grant. I think those kind of check the box because you check the ownership box, you check the zoning box already. You're checking a lot of things really well. So I really think it's kind of the access and then just kind of taking it further on some of that due diligence or the key items that I see.
So access and wetlands, that information is being done right.
And wetlands, and there's some other studies, archaeological species, making sure everything, all of those studies. So there's really, I say, 5 studies in the due diligence, but I would prioritize continuing that wetlands and, seeing what the Corps says is jurisdictional versus non-jurisdictional. Because that really impacts your footprint and maybe where you want to do that stream crossing in terms of time and money too for a prospect.
Thank you. It was an excellent presentation.
I would just add one thing is that I think there's a geotechnical report, but it might be a little dated. You can order a digital geotechnical report, which won't be as good as actually drilling holes, but that might be a good use of some of that matching grant funds because you can order a stage 1 geotechnical from Terracon for just a couple $1,000, $2,500 or something like that. So, short of going out and going ahead and doing more geotechnical borings, which you're never going to get them in exactly the right spots, doing something like that is a really low-cost way to make your site more well-characterized and more attractive. I also think that it's, you know, like, so if I use the Van Pool example, you know, that would have worked here because they did not have exotic requirements on water and wastewater. Really, all they needed was just for their employees. So that would have been, you know, this site could have set up really well for them.
That's what, I think it's kind of that distribution or lighter industrial again, until you look at that long-term utility planning. And that's really probably that third thing is looking, you know, continuing with Duke, getting that other infrastructure here, but thinking about it, if it is going to be more than one user there, that capacity could be eaten up pretty easily on the water and wastewater and stuff as well, for multiple users.
On the electric side of the utilities, we're told by Duke in working with them the timeline, and we've got it down to somewhere similar to 6 months, 8 months, something like that. Do you see that as been an issue, or I would think anything would have that kind of construction time?
Yeah, I don't think that, Duke's never the one to hold up the project on things, I don't think so. But no, it's just one of those, and it's kind of, that kind of timeline wouldn't concern me for that type of project. You know, if it's a much more intensive and looking at transmission or whatever, you know, that I'll look at Duke for help on, you know, those timelines. But
We've had those conversations and know about what it is, so.
yeah, so that's why I said, I know that as a limitation currently today, but because if you hadn't already had all of those discussions in that planning, then I would have more of that concern of, because I think it's coming from across the interstate too, so if you were telling me it was coming from all that, but it had not been to the point where it is already with Duke, I would have that concern, but because there have been those discussions, I feel much more comfortable with that timeline and planning.
And also, Keith and I work with the economic development managers all over the Carolinas, and I will tell you, with Donna Phillips, you got a bulldog here. She will keep the company pushed to the limit on your behalf.
We are aware of that. We think a lot of Donna Phillips. All right, anything else, Commissioner?
Yeah, one more question. In your analysis here, you recommend, you're saying the site is good for general manufacturing, warehousing and storage and chemical manufacturing. Is there any other possibilities?
And I said it wasn't good for chemicals, so I kind of took some different realms of the projects to see that and those are broad sectors, and that's why it's very hard at this, you know, level of the process. I really see distribution or some type of lighter industrial use, so that's what I like, that the conceptuals can show some different lighter manufacturing. I don't know if you have an example of something, but you know, the manufacturing is where you start using a little bit more on the water and wastewater and some of those things. So that's why I said I thought about food, but then it sounds like there may be some other areas that are more suitable for that, or, but there are, you know, I would kind of play on some of your attributes that you have here in the region to play on, but I really think the logistics is the key. I think that's probably the easiest first tenant, probably, but that's just kind of, I see the interstate and the utilities.
And the best, there are a million different uses that can go to that site which we have not contemplated. And if you get an RFI and you look at it and you think it's going to be a good site and it would be a good fit for your community, then go for it. I mean, don't let our analysis stand in the way. I think that just with the lower wastewater and water capacities, that's going to limit you on the manufacturing side to things that are like, you know, assembly or pressing, or, you know, things that are don't require, it's not a process-related industry.
Any staff member have questions? Mr. Lamb?
Yeah, the access issue that was pointed out, I know there's, to the south, there is a piece of land and then a road. But absent going there, would a loop from 97 take care of the need for a second access?
it helps, but I wouldn't say it's the best. That I would still think a two, especially targeting distribution, two true axes are great. But I think, and also I don't know on the distance on that side is that I don't know if we looked, was it going to be too close to have, or was it going to be a right in, right out, or?
The DOT could have some concerns on that. We got to be careful of the environmental issues too. If we
Yeah.
Big two stream crossings.
Yeah, so I think that's why it was kind of, that could help satisfy some of that requirement, but I don't think it's going to be perfect, even given some of these other considerations.
And most companies like to separate their employee and their truck traffic.
Right.
So, I mean, you need to egress, ingress just for emergency purposes, but ideally they'd like to completely separate employee and truck traffic.
Other staff members? We have numerous partners in Nash County in the room. Any one of our partners in various aspects of economic development have any questions? And we do thank you for being here today. Well, seeing none, on behalf of the Board of Commissioners in Nash County, we certainly want to thank you for your work on this. It's the one thing I leave every time I hear one of these presentations. For about the last 10 years, I didn't hear it in my early years, but it just seems like what sticks with me most is the fact that your site selectors come here with the thought process of what you can do, what you can find to eliminate a given site. That's concerning, but I do know that's how it works because I hear it so many times, and you just got to get yourself ready. You got to keep yourself ready because when you come here, it doesn't take the human mind too much to find a reason not to do something. So that in itself makes it a real challenge but we're on a level playing field with everyone else in the industry, I know. But it's hard for me to think backwards, and I'm almost thinking backwards when I try to prepare Nash County to look at something in that direction. But you hear it so many times, I know it's to be facts. But again, thank you for being here. We appreciate it, and always appreciate what Duke does for us, and you have always been mighty kind to us, and again, Donna Phillips, who apparently had to leave, but I don't know of a better partner that we've had for a very long time. Thank y'all. I'm going to take just about a 5-minute break. We do have a little bit of more commissioner business to take care of today while we are assembled in a public hearing, but just to take a short pause, you're welcome to stay and hear a little bit about housing if you like to, but understand all of you are busy. Thank you. Okay, we finished up item 7 on the agenda. We'll now be on 8, which is a public hearing for Cdbg-CZ. And I'll turn it over to Patrick McGee for the presentation on this as well.
Good afternoon. Today I'm here to talk about a proposed Cdbg-CB, which is Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus Project. At your desk are a few pages which we will get to during the course of my presentation. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the public hearing. It's required for the fiscal year 2020-2021 North Carolina Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Program in order to submit an application for funding. The purpose of the public hearing is to allow residents or citizens an opportunity to express views concerning community development priorities, available funds and eligible activities, and review program compliance prior to the county's project-specific application to the state administering agencies. Now, a little bit about general CDBG. This is federal funding. It comes from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. For us, it comes through the state because we are a non-entitlement community. All NC small cities except the 24 entitlement municipalities can apply, and all NC counties except for Cumberland, Mecklenburg, Union, and Wake can apply. CDBG program activities must meet one of the national objectives. They must benefit low and moderate income persons and/or prevent or eliminate slum and blight and/or address an urgent need. So the CDBG program can fund a wide variety of community development activities, and the state has chosen to fund several activities, which include now coronavirus. So available funding in the 2020-2021 fiscal year in North Carolina include funds for economic development, neighborhood revitalization, infrastructure, disaster recovery, and coronavirus. So the coronavirus funds are administered by the North Carolina Department of Commerce Rural Economic Development Division. There's about $27 million in funding in round one, with a potential of a round two of about the same amount. The maximum award is $900,000, and the application period began September 1st, and applications are accepted on a first-come, first-served basis. The grant period is about 30 months. So now a little bit specifically about coronavirus funding. The purpose of the CDBG CV funds is to help communities prepare, prevent, or respond to the health and economic impacts of COVID-19. Activities must focus on critical local needs identified by the community in collaboration with state and local health officials, with primary assistance for low to moderate income residents. All NC CDBG CV project activities will meet the urgent need national objective. However, grantees must also have a benefit to low to moderate income persons. So there are 3 categories for which the CV priorities may fall under: public service, public facilities, and economic development. So we have worked for the last couple of months with the Wooten Company and with the North Carolina Department of Commerce, and we have also worked with different county departments and with United Way and other nonprofits in Nash County to arrive at a project. So our proposed project, if you would look at your maps, and it's two-sided, Nash County's area-wide low to moderate income benefit is 39.38%, which is less than 51%. So we have them map the census block groups and the municipalities, which is what is on your map, what is on this piece of paper. One side is municipalities, and one side is the census block groups, where we could assist verified low to moderate income residents. So Nash County will apply for about $900,000 of CV funds if you approve the application. And this will meet 2 of the priorities, which is public facilities in low to moderate income census blocks and low to moderate income municipalities, and public service to verified LMI residents of Nash County. So the CDBG CV application requires an action plan to prevent what's called a duplication of benefits, so that there's no double dipping. So this requires payments for subsistence, which would be like for rent, mortgage, and utilities, to be paid directly to the utility on behalf of a low to moderate income family, if they qualify. And the households would have to pay back funds if it is determined that there is a duplication of benefits. The county proposed project activities include, number one, creation of Wi-Fi zones. Now, these would be limited because we could only provide this service within the areas that are above the 51% low to moderate income benefit. And we have worked diligently with Cloudwise and Wooten to arrive at some possible sites where we could do this. So the identified locations of and we work with the municipalities. The 10 proposed locations of the Wi-Fi zones, which would be public facilities, would include Nash Central Middle School, J.W. Glover Park, the Boys and Girls Club, Castelia Community Park, Whitaker's Town Hall, Middlesex Town Hall, Middlesex Fire Department, Spring Hope Town Hall, Spring Hope Police Department, and the Spring Hope Library. So that would be the first part, the first aspect to this application. The second aspect to this application, there's a drawing here, a rendering, which is a mobile medical center to be utilized by the Nash County Health Department, Department of Public Health, to provide immunizations and related medical care in the low to moderate income geographical locations, providing ease of access to preventive care and medical assistance to our most vulnerable and high-risk populations, which is, of course, key to preventing the transmission of the coronavirus. The third aspect to the application is this printout, which shows hand washing stations. They would be located at public facilities in the LMI census block groups and the LMI municipalities to help prevent the spread of coronavirus. Proposed locations include the Castelia Community Park and Town Hall, Spring Hope Town Hall and Library, Middlesex Town Hall and Library, and Whitaker's Town Hall and Library, and Sharpsburg Town Hall. And the fourth aspect to the application includes subsistence payments to prevent utility shutoffs, eviction, and homelessness. North Carolina Governor Cooper's executive orders 124 and 142 prohibited utility shutoffs for non-payment for residential customers during the declared state of emergency from March 10th to July 29th, 2020. And assistance payments and the number of households assisted are contingent upon the eligibility determination from Commerce and income verification of each household and verification of no duplication of benefits. There will be a cap established for each household in order to provide the assistance to as many households as possible, with most assistance intended for very low and low-income households more than moderate-income households. And upon consideration, under consideration is to calculate the average monthly cost per utility to estimate the cap. So for example, preliminary calculations assume receipt of the full grant amount and a cap of approximately $1,000 per household for the 6 months. And if this were to occur, it is estimated that approximately 351 households can be assisted. Now, there's other programs, and what this would do would provide assistance to certain families in certain locations, sort of freeing up some of the other funding to be used in the other areas where it can be used. Nash Edgecombe Economic Development, also known as NEED, will be our vital partner in the CV program in the areas of application intake, determining the best fit financial assistance for the households and based on what funds are available. And they will make the subsistence payments directly on behalf of the household to the utility. They have the database resources that enable them to ensure that no duplication of benefits would occur. And we did explore several other organizations, and they were the one in Nash County that seemed to be able to take this on. So the performance and requirements for CDBG, Nash County has a healthy history of receiving CDBG program funding in the past and has had no compliance issues. We have had the first public hearing already, and if awarded, we will adopt all the plans and policies that HUD requires us to adopt. If there are, according to our recently adopted citizen participation plan, if there are comments that come in the next few days, we will respond to them. We did not have any last time. You may recall that that was something that we now do. And no comments were received last time. The application has been drafted. We will continue to revise it. I can tell you, as late as almost 5 o'clock yesterday, Commerce was still making decisions about what kind of things could be included in an application. So if anything changes, we'll just reallocate, try to still obtain $900,000. For instance, the trailer for the health department has been in and out several times, but now it's in as of yesterday afternoon. So after your public hearing, I would recommend, if it's appropriate, to adopt the resolution that you have, which enables us to apply for these funds and designates the county manager and his successors to complete any application documents that don't require board action. So the recommendation is to hold the public hearing and then adopt the resolution.
Any questions from Commissioner Ms. McGee this time?
Yeah, I got a couple.
Sure.
On this hand wash station, it's a portable station. It has to be stocked then with water and some type of hand soap. Would that be the responsibility of the area that was using it, or?
We would probably supply them with product and ask them if they would replenish that supply on a regular basis as
So that would be
needed.
an ongoing situation then?
Yes, and the grant would only cover the 30 months. So once that period ends, kind of have to see, if they want to keep it and keep funding the supply of the product themselves.
Okay, on this trailer here, you say this will be owned by the health department?
Correct.
Would it just be used in situations like COVID-19, and then what would happen to it at other times? Just be stored, or what?
Just like with some of the trailers and vehicles that emergency services has, it does have limited use. However, once that 30 months is up, then we would be beyond the requirements of the grant. So we could use it for lots of different things that were related to, even loosely, to coronavirus and other immunizations and that kind of thing during the grant period in those areas that were in yellow
Right.
on the map.
But it's a mobile unit that would go out into the community, right? Who
Yes.
would staff that?
Well, I've been working with Deputy Director Trey Wright and Health Department staff. It would be similar to how they have tents now, but it would be a trailer to use instead. And they already had in their budget a vehicle which could tow it. It's in this year's budget for them
Would there be a
coincidentally.
nurse, a doctor with this trailer, or what?
Whatever they need to staff it, I'm not sure what that is, but same as they staff the tents that are located in different places.
And that's already in their budget?
They're
They've got
not
staffing
planning
in
on
their
an
budget.
increased staff, no, to be able to do this.
Other questions?
I would like to address something Mr. Belfield had brought up. We did look into whether we could assist the homeless shelters, but we cannot do anything within the city limits of Rocky Mount due to it being an entitlement city and already receiving funds directly from HUD.
Okay. Other questions?
There is no match, I should mention that as well.
All right, if no other questions, entertain a motion at this time to go into a public hearing on this matter.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Leggett, is there a second to that motion? Second by Commissioner Richardson. Any questions on the motion? All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by a like sign. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now in a public hearing to take any questions that we may have from the public concerning this particular grant application. If there's anyone here that President has a question, we'd be glad to hear from you or any comments on it. And of course, as Ms. McGee said, there is a period of time in the new public hearing regs that would allow you, how many days, Mr. Durham, to submit a written comment? I believe I've heard 3 days, maybe?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I heard that in another meeting that I listened to recently. It was 3 to 4 days that you could file a written comment on a public hearing after the date of the public hearing, and those comments would be considered and addressed. So if there's no one here at this time to speak, keep that part in mind that you would be allowed to do. And I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Outlaw, second by Commissioner Belfield. Any questions on that motion? All in favor of that motion, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by a like sign? Mr. McGee, I guess you want action, what action do you need from the board?
Approve the resolution.
Okay. We do have a resolution that was the back sheet there, and I'd entertain a motion to approve and allow me to sign that resolution at this time.
Move approval.
Moved by Commissioner Belfield, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Leggett. Any questions on that motion? All in favor of the motion, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by a like sign? Motion carries as well. Any other business that Commissioner has for the board at this time? Management staff, Mr. Lamb?
No, sir.
Okay. If not, I'd entertain a motion to recess this meeting till Monday, October the 26th at 2:30 in the Commissioners' room. And the purpose of that meeting for the public is a review of our economic development study that we have had underway for quite a few months. And looking forward to getting that for Nash County and our new department and going through that as well.
Move to recess.
I have a motion to recess by Commissioner Combs. Is there a second?
Second.
Many seconds. I think I heard Mr. Belfield. Any questions on that motion? All in favor of that motion, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by a like sign? We stand recessed until October 26, 2020 at 2:30. Thank you all.